the question that we left off with, and that was, we studied two Mishnahs, and it seems from the Mishnah that what's more important, this world or the next? Just to quickly recap, the Medrash tells us that before a soul descends into this world, it does not want to go. The soul says, I prefer to bask in the heavenly realm, where certainly life seems to be more spiritual, basking in the spiritual realm. Why come here into this physical earthly world? That was one medrash we mentioned. The second one is a Mishnah in Pirkei Avot that we read, Ethics of Our Fathers, where it says this world is like the corridor to the next world. And therefore you should prepare yourself in this world to be ready for the next. What does that seem to say? The next world is the grand palatial mansion. This world is just the introduction to it. It's just the entryway. In fact, it says prepare yourself here, and it's far greater one moment of the world to come than to live in this world. So based on that teaching, my question to you is, it seems that if next world is far better than this world, then who needs to be here? Right? Why don't we all rush to go to the next world? So let's just look at it on the screen. We said that the soul and the body is like a stranger on foreign soil. That's what it seems from the teaching of the Midrash and the Mishnah. Now, if that's the case, the journey into this physical world seems to be somewhat incidental to the soul's spiritual reality, because if the soul's spiritual reality is the ideal, and remember we previously discussed that the soul precedes the body. We quoted the biblical verses. We could go back to those very quickly. How the Torah says, God formed the human of the soil from the earth and breathed into his nostrils the neshama, the soul of life. Unlike the animals where it says, God said, let the earth bring forth all kinds of living beings. Meaning that the creation of the human being, the hardware came before the software. The body was formed from the dust of the earth, hence the name Adam, which means Adama, from the dust of the earth, and the word Adameh, which means created in the divine image, which is the soul. Whoops, let's just go forward a second. Where are we? Hello, Rex, welcome. So let's just get that screen right back up again. Can you see it? Unlike the animal where both came together, body and soul were all created at once. Meaning they were one entity created together. So if that's the case, our sages tell us, the soul does not perish when the body does. When we leave this world, although the body might decay and disintegrate into the dust of the earth, the soul will continue to exist. Now, there's different levels of soul, so there is part of the soul that remains in the body, or in the place where the body's buried. But for the most part, the soul continues its journey in the heavenly realm. And if that's the case, for the soul, earth is really just part of the journey, but this is not the main function and purpose, at least so it seems from this teaching. So there's 3 points that we deduce from here. Number 1, the real me is my soul, not my body. Okay? Agreed? At least so it seems from the teachings. And that is true. If we talk about being created in the divine image, let's look around this room or at all these wonderful people participating on Zoom. Don't we all look different from one another? So what does it mean we're created in the divine image? That refers to the soul. The second element of the soul that we discussed here is the real me. The soul is eternal. It came before we arrived in this world, and it continues after. So I am eternal as well. And the third point is that the real eternal me is relatively unaffected by birth and by death, which is why someone asked the other day, are we born by our own choice? And the answer is no. The Mishnah tells us very clearly, Al korcha chai, it's not by your choice that you were born, the Al korcha chatames, and it's not by your choice that you die, which is why when we came to the discussion about suicide, which is a very delicate and sensitive topic on its own, because unfortunately it's on the rise, we say it's not by your choice, why Jewish law forbids one to take their own life. Why in most cases of suicide, we say it's probably a mental health issue rather than somebody trying to defy the will of God. So what can possibly emerge from all of this is that Judaism, God forbid, maybe, seemingly, takes a flippant approach to death, that we're saying, maybe, I'm not advocating this, but maybe for somebody who wants to commit suicide, they're saying, I want to get closer to God quicker. I want to return my soul like the candle that's flickering. The soul wants to go back to its heavenly source, to be reconnected, reunited with God. So next time you're in the restaurant and they ask you if you want a Diet Coke or not a Diet Coke, you might be confused. Do you want a diet or not diet? Now, why would we be worried about death if seemingly from the Mishnah, the real me, my soul, continues on a better and a greater place after I pass on? So maybe it's a good thing to die. And if the Mishnah is telling, if we want to take this Mishnah at face value, then the soul was never too keen on this world in the first place, as the Mishnah said, and as you saw in that song that we played on Monday. The little neshama resistant to come into this world, hesitating, not really wanting to go here. Why do I want to go into a world where I'm filled with all types of challenges and struggles? You know, my friend brought his kid to the office the other day, and the kid began to cry. And now everybody, was a whole commotion. Everybody gathered around. What's the matter? What's wrong? So the kid turned to her dad and said, Daddy, I was thinking I'm coming to your office. You told me about all these clowns you work with. Why don't I see any clowns here? If life, we have to face difficult comrades, associates, mishpacha, who needs it? Who wants it? That's not the life. That's what the soul wants. The soul was never keen to begin with to come to this place with all the obstacles, challenges, struggles. So why should we be overly bothered when the time comes and, okay, we should be glad that a soul is departed. In fact, the Gemara says we usually get it wrong. When a child's born, we have a big simcha, big celebration. When a person passes on, we mourn, we cry. Says the Gemara, maybe that's not the way it should be. The Gemara uses an example of, we were talking yesterday about the Titanic. The Talmud says that when boats used to return from a journey, there would be a tremendous celebration. Why? Because the beginning of the journey, you didn't know. Will the boat hit an iceberg? Will it get overtaken by pirates? Will it experience some other kind of shipwreck? You never know what it's going to encounter in its journey. When it returns and all its passengers arrive safely, or the cargo that is carried has arrived at its destination, the Gemara says now we have good reason to celebrate. In a similar way, when a person passes on from this world, perhaps, in fact, next week is Lag BaOmer. And Lag BaOmer is the yahrzeit, the anniversary of the passing of the great sage Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. And in fact, we celebrate the day of his passing. It's called Yom Hilula. Hilula really means like a wedding day. And in that sense, we say, when a person enters this world, we don't know. Are they going to fulfill the divine mandate, the mission for which they were dispatched into this world? Why their soul came into this body? Or will they squander it away? Now, if we take an honest accounting of ourselves, at night when we go to sleep, we should do something called Cheshbon HaNefesh. It's an accounting of the soul. We look back on the day that was. In fact, during this period between Pesach and Shavuos is an ideal time to do it. We count the Omer. It's not just about counting every day. It's about making every single day count. It's about looking back on this day and say, what did I achieve today? Today was 25 days of the Omer counting. What did I do? How did I better prepare myself to receive the Torah on Shavuos, which is only 24 days away? Could you believe it? We're already over 50% of the Omer counting. For me, it's even scarier because on Shavuos, I hit a big milestone. I won't tell you now what it is. But it's quite scary to think, oh my gosh, 40 years. Yeah, my soul came into this world 40 years ago on Shavuos. Oh my gosh, what did I do here? How much time did I waste? In fact, somebody once told me, you know what hell is? You know what the definition of purgatory is? When you get a video of your life in this world, and you realize all the minutes you wasted that could have been better utilized. You could have spent quality time with your family. You could have studied more Torah. You could have done another good deed. You could have achieved so much in this world. And you look back and say, I wasted my time on that nonsense. And I wasted that moment on that nonsense. That's why the Mishnah tells us you should do teshuvah the day before you're going to die. Maybe that's the next video I'll show you, is of the person who invented this device and invented the computer I'm teaching you from right now. You know what his name was? It's not Bill Gates. Come on.
Apple.
Yeah. Steve Jobs. Very good. Steve Jobs is very sick before he moved on from this world. And he gave a very powerful talk in which he spoke about his regrets, his remorse for where he should have spent better quality of his time. And Sam Walton of Walmart gave a very similar talk when he died. So do we need to hear those talks from others, or we can remind ourselves? That's why the Mishnah says, do teshuvah the day before you're going to die. But I don't know when I'm going to die. That's right. Live every day, so to say, like the last day. Not in a morbid way, but in a meaningful way. How will I live? If today was my last day, would I really get caught up in that nonsensical faribble? Or would I realize what's important and what's trivial? So indeed, there are some religions that don't place that much value on life in this world and see this world just as a insignificant stepping stone to the bigger and greater spiritual delights in the hereafter. And that's why they are happy to send their youngsters to blow themselves up as suicide and homicide bombers, because great, they'll go to the next world and get 72 pizza pies. Or I don't know what. Great sage, the Radvaz. He was a first-hand observer of Muslim culture in the 16th century in Morocco and in Egypt. And he testified in his book called Metzudas David. He has a very powerful, beautiful commentary on many parts of Torah, including on the Tehillim. And he says that I personally observed that the Ishmaelites disproportionately oppose displays of mourning to the extent of forbidding the reading of the rending of garments in grief. Now, Jewish law also forbids certain behaviors in grief. If you read this week's Parsha, you see it says that one is not allowed to shave their head in grief. Now, if you want to take a zero haircut, Jewish law does not forbid it. When does Jewish law forbid shaving your head? If it's done as a sign of mourning. He says that in the Muslim culture of the 16th century, they believed in the eternity of the soul. And indeed, we also believe in the eternity of the soul. But we also put an emphasis on life in this world, which is our question, if based on the Mishnah's teaching. And we're going to get to another Mishnah, another fascinating and powerful teaching in a moment, which I'll share with you. We're going to get to that text next. But he says that what he experienced in the Muslim world then, in the 16th century, was that because the emphasis was on the eternity of the soul and Olam Haba, which is part of Jewish belief too. Don't forget, Judaism precedes Islam by many centuries and precedes Christianity as well, even more so. Islam even more so, but both of them, many religions are offshoots of plagiarized Judaism. Okay, and we see the results of a religion, of a culture that takes death lightly. Certainly, you see that in the lifestyle of Islam, no doubt. So, in fact, let me read to you his words. Okay, give me a second. I'm going to try to pick it up here. And he doesn't advocate for the avoidance of mourning due to the belief in the eternity of the soul. Yes, we believe that the soul is eternal, but we also mourn when a person passes on. But why are we mourning when a person passes on if we also believe that the soul is eternal? What are we mourning for? Shouldn't we be happy that a person died? Should we not be happy? He's in a better place. In fact, it's the stupidest thing I've ever heard people say at a shiva. Oh, aren't you glad he's in a better place now? How ridiculous. Okay? So the truth is, we'll have to get back to this. I wanted to read to you what the Radvaz says, but yeah.
How does that go with what Cohen is saying?
So the same author of that in Kohelet is in another verse. He says, "Lakol zman va'et." There's a time and a place for everything. L'chol chefetz tachat hashamayim. For everything under the heaven, everything has its time. Eit lalechet, eit lamut. There's a time lamut. There's a time to be born, laledet. The eit lamut, and there's a time to die, right? So obviously there's a time and a place for each thing, and based on what we were discussing before, there's a Mishnah that tells us that the soul doesn't want to come into this world because the soul doesn't want to face all the challenges and obstacles that the journey of this world will include. And there's a Mishnah that tells us that Olam Hazeh, this world is just a prosdor. It's just the gateway, it's just a corridor to the next world. But nevertheless, we have to understand. In fact, the Medrash tells us about that statement from King Solomon. Eit laledet. There's a time to be born and a time to die. He says, Misha sha'adam nolad unigzar alav kama shanim yicheh. From the time a person's born, it is already decreed on high how many years. It's determined how long they're going to live, when they're going to die. So not only the number of years is predetermined, which is why, again, suicide is forbidden from a Jewish perspective because one is interfering in God's decision. But according to the Maharsha, it is also predestined precisely to the very day and month that a person will pass away and the year that they're going to pass. So by definition then, death cannot be prematurely imposed on a person. When a person is ill, we don't say an illness or an accident. You know, it's funny to use the term premature death. Premature by what definition? Premature by our definition that a person should live 70, 80, 90, whatever number of years. But according to what King Solomon is saying, then that's not the case because every person comes into the world at the appropriate determined time and leaves this world at their time when they're supposed to go. Now again, it doesn't mean that we're not sad. We are sad, and we're sad for a variety of reasons, including the fact that we will no longer be with that person. The sadness then is for us, not necessarily for them. The sadness also is that this person who brought a tremendous light into this world during their time here, their mission's complete. So obviously, in Chavot HaLevavot, a lot of this is mentioned, the idea that what our purpose is in this world, and when we've completed that mission. So perhaps the sadness is only for us that we're no longer with that individual, not necessarily for them. Okay, but the truth is this is a more sensitive and delicate, and there's a lot to learn in this, and I'm not sure we could say it all in one moment. But there's certainly a lot to this that we would have to analyze and discuss. In fact, I was looking for the teaching of the Radvaz, Rabbi David ben Zimri, who discusses this, but I have to find his source. Actually, let me see if I have it somewhere here. I think I do. Give me a minute. And I'll tell you if I have it here. Where did it go? Radvaz. Yeah, I found it. So Radvaz says as follows. Okay, let me share it with you. It's very interesting. If you find this of interest, if anyone has any questions while I find it, here we go. Says the Radvaz. You want to say something, Stephen?
I'm a bit confused because the whole thing, my idea is that the whole thing of being in this world is to do the mitzvah.
Yes.
And because in world to come, we're not able to do the mitzvah.
That's part of the sadness. That's part of the sadness. But that certainly the Mishnah tells us that the next world is a far greater place than this world. So part of the sadness certainly is the fact that we're no longer able to conduct ourselves in that way and live that mission. Let me read you the words of the Radvaz here. Okay, Rabbi David ben Zimri, or David ben Zimra, he was a famous halachist. He was born in Spain and immigrated to Tzfat in Israel upon the expulsion of Jews from Spain. As you know, the Spanish Inquisition was in 1492. Many great sages from Spain then emigrated to Israel. I believe there's a recent Netflix series that talks about the Spanish Inquisition. Be interesting to watch. Oh, certainly many were murdered and many became Marranos. You know what a Marrano means? A pig. So when they became pigs. The Spanish called them pigs because they pretended to be Christian on the outside, but they hid their Jewish identity. So they were called pigs for that reason. So he moved to Egypt. He served as the rabbi there, as a dayan in the community, head of the yeshiva. In Cairo, there used to be a very large Jewish community in Egypt. And that's why he highlights what he personally observed, the Muslims of Egypt and Morocco, where he lived, and I guess Spain as well, but Spain was more of a Christian culture, how to them, they didn't grieve the loss of the passing of family, because they said, oh, they're in a better place. Okay, so that's just a little bit. Let me read to you what he says. Okay, he says the most basic understanding of the Torah's prohibition against self-mutilation, again, discussing that idea of suicide and things like that. But here he's talking about a different idea. Self-mutilation in response to the passing of a loved one, which again is in this week's parsha of Emor. How it says that the pagans would grieve by shaving their heads, and that's not something we're prohibited from doing that. Also, it talks about different self-mutilation methods that people used to grieve, and the Torah forbids. We rend a garment, not ourselves. The torn garment perhaps symbolizes a torn soul, torn heart, torn soul, that we're grieving, we're mourning the passing of our loved one. But we realize the difference. The difference is that the shirt is ephemeral. It's here, you could throw it in the garbage. In fact, we do dispose of it after mourning. We're not meant to hold on to our torn shirt. We're meant to throw it out. The mourning is finished. But unlike the garment, the body, which you could say, is no longer. The body is buried in the ground. It will decompose. It will disintegrate. But the soul is eternal. So the shirt represents the body. The body decomposes. The shirt is thrown in the garbage. Yes, we treat the body with more respect, and that's why it's buried. But the soul, we know, is eternal, unlike the physical. So he says as follows. Again, I'm going to read to you his words here. He says the fact that the most basic understanding of this prohibition of self-mutilation in response to a loved one's passing is that such a reaction demonstrates a lack of belief of the soul's immortality. Besides, it is improper for an intelligent person who has studied the Torah to be exceedingly pained over God's ways and decisions. Now, yes, going back to King Solomon in Ecclesiastes saying, La kol zman ve'et, there's a time for mourning, and there's a time for sadness, and there's a time for happiness. And when a person passes on, that's the wrong time to be joyous. And there's different gradations, different levels of the mourning, which we'll get to in a couple of weeks' time. We'll discuss that. There's a time a person's called an onen. An onen is the grief before burial. Then there's Shiva. Even within Shiva, there's the first 3 days are more difficult than the following 4 days. Then there's Shloshim, the first 30 days. And then there's the year. And time heals. Time does heal. And therefore, says the Radvaz, our sages caution against excessive mourning. For such is the convention of the nations who do not believe in the eternal nature of the soul. And therefore they cry that this person's gone. Yes, we cry, we mourn. But after Shiva, you have to get up. After Shiva, you can't stay in the same place. And he says, I've personally observed the Ishmaelites disproportionately oppose displays of mourning. Now it's the opposite that he's lamenting, to the extent of forbidding the rending of the garments in grief. He's saying that Muslims said, death is a good thing, embrace it. You got your 72 pizza pies.
72 versions.
Right?
Pizza pies.
So he's saying that the general Jewish rule, the golden path is what? What's the Shlav HaZahav of Rambam? Yeah? Is in the middle. The middle path. Exactly. He says, Ra'oi lit abel avelut mimutza. What's avelut mimutza? The proper way of mourning is, it's not a time to be jolly and celebrating, but it shouldn't be too excessive either. The middle path. In general, my mother of blessed memory had an expression in Yiddish. Als mit atzi teugnisht. You know what that means? Als mit atzi teugnisht. Anything that's excessive. Right? Too much eating is no good. Too much dieting, also no good. You have to know find that middle path.
Too much drinking.
Okay, a little drinking is a good thing. It's not bad, but don't overdo it.
Everything in moderation.
You know what she would say in English? Everything in moderation, including moderation.
Yeah.
Okay. But this is a very far from the Jewish perspective to say that we don't care about death, that death is something good. That's not what he's saying here. He's saying very clearly that it's not something we embrace, and that's why we mourn it. Right? In the Jewish view, life here in this world is paramount. As Stephen said, in this world only can you do mitzvahs. In the next world you can't do these good deeds to do a favor for another, to put on tefillin, to light Shabbos candles, to eat matzah. So death indeed is seen as a tragedy. That doesn't diminish the importance of the next world. We're not going to say that the next world is no longer the palace that we described it. Right? Next world is still the traklin, still a palatial mansion. It has its benefits over this world. But that doesn't negate the importance of this world. There's no greater mitzvah, in fact, than saving a life. We don't say, why save? What doctor doesn't say, why save a life? He's going to a better place. Don't call Hatzalah, God forbid. Of course. We don't say, you know what? It's God's will. That's a mishigas. That's chassid shota. That's foolish piety. Yeah, that's not our religion. In our religion, we say, the Torah tells us very clearly to do everything possible to save a life. You save one life, you save the whole world. We have to be moser nefesh. We even endanger our own lives to save another life. And to save our own as well. The Torah tells us to look after your own health and well-being. So according to Jewish law, very clearly preserving a life takes precedence over nearly every other mitzvah that exists. So that is what's important. Protecting your life and saving other lives. So if that's the case, how do we understand the Mishnah then? If the Mishnah is telling us that this world, Olam Haza Dama Leprozda, that this world is just the antechamber, what do you call it, the corridor to the next world. That's the traklin, that is the palace itself. How does this make sense? Especially since we know the Jewish value tells us preservation of life precedes almost all other mitzvahs that exist. Right? So therefore, I'm going to read to you now what Rambam tells us. Says Maimonides, Rambam, this is in Mishnah Torah, the laws, the fundamentals of the Torah. And he tells us as follows. Kishiyamod go. When if a non-Jew attempts to force a Jew to violate one of the Torah's commandments at pain of death, what is the rule? We're talking about in times of persecution, of anti-Semitism, of hatred, when Jews really experienced the worst in our history. So the law is that you should violate any commandment of the Torah, because what does the Torah say? V'chai bahem. This we read in last week's Parsha Kedoshim. You should live by them. What does it mean to live by them? Torah is meant to live by. Rashi there tells us not to that mitzvahs should never come at the cost of your life. Many good examples of that. But the Torah, the observance of Torah mitzvahs should not come at a cost of your health and well-being. Except for, we know that there's 3 specific exceptions. Murder, idolatry, and adultery. But other than that, life takes precedence over mitzvahs, even when a person is on their deathbed and there's no natural hope for their recovery. Even at that stage, we do everything possible, including desecrating Shabbos. If we see a building collapse, we desecrate Shabbos. And there was an example of that last year, if you recall, in Surfside, Florida, where a building collapsed, and there were hundreds of people buried in the rubble. They didn't stop searching, not even on Shabbos, until they knew for certain that there was no more any chance of survival. I daven every morning at Torah Academy with a gentleman who lost both of his parents there, a gentleman from this community. Both his parents were in that building and tragically lost their lives in that incident. So we do everything it takes, even if it's going to just give the person a few more moments of life. But we say every moment is precious. And just think about that. This means that the soul's occupation of mitzvahs is less significant than the life of the body. We're not talking about a person who's healthy to go and do mitzvahs. So Stephen, you mentioned a very good point. But even if the person can't do mitzvahs, we're not pegging the importance of saving a life that they could go do a mitzvah. Even if they're just going to be able to breathe a few more minutes in this world. We still say that give that person another moment. And obviously, there's a lot within Jewish law, which we had a previous course, you may recall, where we discussed the ethics in medicine, and there we had a lot more. It was in our course called Medicine and Morals. There we discussed the specific cases where perhaps, you don't have to preserve a life, especially if it's not their will and desire, especially if their quality of life might be compromised. But that's a separate discussion. I won't get into that right now. But for the most part, we say, Pikuach Nefesh, you save a life regardless of any circumstances. Because the Torah says, V'chai bahem, you should live, and life should not come at a cost of living. So, I think we're going to be in a little bit of a dizzy state here now, because on the one hand, we just said before that the next world's in the main place, and the soul doesn't want to come into this world, and like the flickering flame, the soul's trying to constantly yearn to go above. Right? So we're telling us, we know and understand that the next world is superior to this world. Yet at the same time, we're telling ourselves, do everything you can to save a life. Pikuach nefesh, save a life at all means, at all costs. Desecrate Shabbos, eat pork, eat pizza on Pesach, eat on Yom Kippur, do whatever it takes, except for those 3 cardinal laws to save a life. So which one is it? Can we go back to the Medrash for a second? Says the Medrash, God tells the soul, God is reassuring to a soul before it comes into this world, and it says, Oilam sha'ani machnischa bo, this world which I'm sending you to, you're dispatched into a world, I want you to know, Yafa yehelecha mima shayita darba. Actually, the world you're going to is far nicer than this spiritual oasis that you are currently inhabiting. And indeed, I formed you exclusively for the purpose of creating mortal life from this particular drop of semen. Hold on a second. Let me finish the medrash and then we'll questions. And with that it says, God, al korchach, against your will, God forcibly installs the soul into the body. So we have some contradictory statements going on in this very medrash itself. On the one hand, the medrash is telling us that the next world is far superior to this world. At the same time, this very medrash is telling us that the soul itself does not want to leave the comfort zone of the heavenly realm. Yet at the same time, it says that God is telling you, why do you think I even created your soul? If not for to come into this world to fulfill its divine mission and purpose. Now, you can understand that even as physical human beings, you don't want to leave your holiday because you're having a good time. But nevertheless, you understand that if you're going to stay at the beach, who's going to pay your bills? So God is saying to the soul, as much as you enjoy basking in the spirituality, of the heavenly realm, that's not the purpose of what you were created for. And that's why, although the Mishnah speaks of the superiority of the world to come, there's another Mishnah that tells us, Yafa shah achat b'teshuva masim tovim b'olam hazeh, a single moment of good deeds and teshuva in this world is far better mikol chayei ha'olam haba, than all of the world to come. So as you can see, there's quite a bit of contradictory remarks in the Medrash and the Mishnah. On the one hand, it's telling us the next world is the palace. The next world is spiritually greater. But as spiritually greater as it is, vacation, holidays, wonderful. But that's not the purpose of life, to always be on vacation. And God is saying to the soul, as great as and spiritual as the next world is, that's not what you were created for. You were not created to stay in the heavenly realm. So yes, this world, the Mishnah tells us, is more precious than the world to come. And it's not a contradiction. The next world is far more spiritually greater, but one moment in this world cannot compare to the next world. Are you left with a contradiction, or are you feeling that it's making sense? Or are you lost?
What will we take to the next
Oh, there's a famous story, maybe I'll tell it to you later, about Reichman. Reichman, as the name indicates, they were a Reich family, rich people. I don't know if all Reichmans are rich, but this particular Reichman family from Toronto is a very wealthy family. We had some guests on Pesach who know them personally, were telling us about them. The story goes that when Mr. Reichman passed away in the 90s, I don't remember his first name, so I'm skipping it, but I believe he has a son who passed away more recently during COVID. They're a very wealthy family. They built Canary Wharf in London. He said to his kids, he left them two wills. One was to be opened before Shiva and the other during Shiva. And when they opened the one before Shiva, it said in it, he wants to be buried in his a favorite pair of socks that he bought specially to be buried with. And they fought with the Chaver Kadisha, can't you bury him this way? He was a big donor and generous and kind. Anyways, the Chaver Kadisha said, we're very sorry. Yeah, they wanted to fulfill the will of their father. And the Chaver Kadisha refused. And after the funeral, they opened the second will, in which he said, by now you realize I didn't even get to take a pair of socks with me. And he was saying, obviously, in the next world, you don't go with all your cash. You go with the receipts. What goodness you achieved in this world. So this gives us the Jewish perspective to some degree on life and death. That's really nuanced and sophisticated. It's true that the soul is eternal, and that the soul as a divine spiritual entity is more naturally at home in the spiritual realms, where it leads a holy spiritual existence and basks in the warm radiance of Hashem and all the wonderful fuzzy stuff that the heavenly realm has. You know the story about that. There was a lady who was one day stuck in the rain. She was making her way to Sydenham Shul, but it was raining so hard, so she went to that St. Mark's Church around the corner, and she winds up there, and the pastor's preaching, and he goes, "Who wants to go to heaven?" And everybody's raising their hands, and he says, "You, old Jewish lady, don't you want to go to heaven?" She says, "I do, but what's the hurry?" So yes, we all want to go there, but we're not in a hurry. We don't want to die yet. So in that sense, yes, it's true that the soul is eternal. Everything we discussed, it's true. And that the soul as a divine spiritual entity more naturally likes the heavenly realm and all that. But at the same time, its very reason for existence is the time that it spends in the physical world and what it accomplishes right here on earth. In fact, not only is its time spent here the reason for its creation, for its existence, it actually constitutes the reason for all of creation from a Jewish perspective. Paradise might be an opulent, luxurious palace in comparison to the corridors of this world. Just as when you go on a holiday to Mauritius and you're staying in a nice, beautiful hotel, but it's not realistic. The only reason it exists is because it is in the service of this world and the work that we do here. Just like your holiday hopefully gives you an opportunity to rejuvenate, to recalibrate, to be re-energized so you can get back to your work. Now, of course, do we live to work or do we work to live is a good question. And hopefully you don't live to work. Your work is only a means to help you live. It is told that on one Matzai Yom Kippur, the holy Chose of Lublin, what was his name? Rabbi Horowitz, I'm forgetting his first name. He was in this beautiful, this unbelievable and elated and expansive mood. And he told the students that if anyone requested, he would tell them what they had prayed for on the holy day and what heaven's response was to their requests. If your rabbi gave you this opportunity, it's something amazing, right? So one brave student approached, and the Rebbe put his hands on the student's head, lazoi, and he reflected for a moment, and he said, "My son, you reasoned with God. It is taught. You told Hashem that every person's livelihood is determined during the days of Teshuvah, the Asereti made Teshuvah between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and that our work and our careers are only a conduit through which God sends his blessings and his sustenance, right? We work to live. So you said to God, you asked that this year you should suffice with creating the conduit one day each week, because you really want to live by this idea of working to live. You asked God, could I only work for one day? Wouldn't that be really nice? And spend the other 6 days of the week immersed in praying and studying Torah, right? That was your request, the Chazah said. And the student was amazed. He said, yes, wow, this is exactly what I requested in my prayers today on Yom Kippur. What was the heavenly response, he asks his Rebbe. So the Chazah of Lublin answered. He said, the angels that were transporting your prayers to the heavenly throne, to the Kisei HaKavod, were amused by your request. Had God wanted you to study and pray 6 days a week without the burdens of this world, God would have never dispatched your soul to this world. Right? You could have done that in heaven too. It's like what somebody told me, Rabbi, I don't know if I could quote it, I guess Rabbi Goldman. He said he just came back from a Pesach program where he was working, and they tried to barter with him. They said, Rabbi Goldman, you're a world-renowned orator, in South Africa. How often do you get to go on holidays? You're now the life for Rabbi Emeritus. I hope I don't. I'm going to paraphrase what he said. So they tried to barter with him and say, come for free. You'll come to us. We'll give you a free Pesach holiday. And that's it. Maybe they even tried to go, you pay your tickets and that. So the rabbi said, listen, to have a free Pesach, I could do it at home. My wife cooks maybe even better than your food. But, so what do I need you for? You could do that at home. God is saying, according to the Chaz of Lublin, if you think that you're coming into this world for a free ride, that you're going to just sit and one day of the week you'll work, and the rest of the time you'll sit in the study hall and learn, God, the angels weren't impressed by your request. They're saying, you know what? God could have kept your soul in heaven for that. God didn't put you into this world so you could just sit and relax. And the idea that the purpose of all of creation is realized by and actualized through our work in this world is expressed in the Talmud. The Gemara says that all of creation was actually conditioned on us here in this corporeal, physical, material, mundane world. And carrying out our mission is what we have to do, what we're here for. So let me read you this from the Gemara. It is in Tractate Masechet Shabbos. Says the Gemara, Shehisna HaKadosh Baruch Hu Mamaisa Bereshis, that when God created this world, God created the universe on a condition. You want to know what the condition is? If we will accept the Torah, then guess what? You'll continue to exist. And if you don't, God says, then Tohu Vavohu, the world will return to nothingness. So again, this is the Gemara Masechet Shabbos. Now, if we don't, I don't know if this is literal or figurative, we can discuss that. But the point is, what is the message that the Gemara is telling us here? If we don't heed the message of the Torah and follow through with our task here in this world, then everything, including all the loftiest of worlds and the most blissful paradises, revert to its pre-creation non-status. Okay, what does it need to exist for? The existence is that we have a mission in this world. God didn't create the universe because he desired paradise and olam haba, but because God desired human beings who would live holy and ethical and moral good lives here in this physical world in a meaningful and purposeful way. That's filled, yes, God gave us all the temptations and all that which comes with the challenges and struggles of this world, which the soul to begin with is worried about. That's why he doesn't want to come here. But because God would not cause us to toil without recompense, God created paradise as a means of providing us with reward for all the important work that we do in this world. But that's a reward. That's the recompense. Imagine a person who proposes to the love of his life, right? And she accepts. The engaged couple settles on a date for their wedding, and with great excitement, they hire a caterer and a photographer, and what else do you need for a nice wedding? Band, the musicians. The other day I was watching, there's an American comedian, I forget his name. He was asking a South African guy. Okay, so the South African guy wound up on he's probably a Sutu or a Zulu, I don't know which tribe he's from. He's being interviewed by this American entertainer. Maybe Dr. Phil, I don't know what the guy's name is. So the fellow asks him, tell me, he's asking a whole panel of guys. If you went to a wedding, what needs to be missing for that wedding to be just incomplete? So he asks this African guy, and the guy goes, the pasta. So the comedian goes, what? He says, you mean to tell me if they have 7-layer cake and Szechuan beef and sushi, and he's listing all these gastronomic delights, but there's no pasta? You're going to tell me this wedding is missing? And the guy goes, no, I'm saying if there's no pasta. And he goes, what do you mean there's no pasta? And they go back and forth. And finally he goes, no, he said, I mean the pricha. The pasta. Of course, you need all these wonderful things, the caterer and the photographer and the musicians and the videographer and the florist and the limousine and the chauffeur and the bartender. You could tell me all the wonderful things that a wedding needs, right? but only to have the bride to get cold feet at that last moment. How does that now feel about, how does he feel about the caterer and the musicians and the photographer and everybody? Not only is he not excited about them, who needs them? What do you think you hired them for? That's just clutter. He really needs a band. As wonderful as Ronnie sings, he didn't hire Ronnie because he needs Ronnie. He hired Ronnie so he could have a beautiful wedding where he could marry his beautiful bride. But now that she's not interested in him, he needs it. So too, God desired a relationship with us. And that relationship is realized through our observance of Torah and mitzvahs. Everything else that God created, from the holiest angel to the most spiritual world, to that little worm that wriggles on the floor of the Amazonian rainforest, constitutes just the supporting cast. Ronnie is there to sing, to bring simchat chatan v'kala. And without the kala, there's no need for the simcha. And the same thing, we are here to facilitate that relationship with God. So when the soul has cold feet, when the soul doesn't want to come to the world, we're saying, hold on, we're missing the purpose. And that's why in Judaism, there's nothing more important than life itself. That's why you could desecrate Shabbos to save a life. That's why you could eat pork to save a life. That's why you could pretty much violate 610 commandments of the Torah in order to save a life. We value life here in this world because here is where it's at. This is the major world leagues. This is the World Cup. This is where we accomplish. It is here where the action is. Life is infinitely more important than the afterlife. Yes, I know the afterlife is that exciting because sometimes many businesses will create incentives for their employees. You'll have this amazing holiday to Las Vegas, fully paid for. Sounds incredible. You're interested in that holiday. You're excited about it. Wow, you want that bonus. It's more exciting than the work. Olam Haba, the next world, seems that much more exciting than this world. But ultimately, you understand that the company needs you to get the work done. And God put us here to get certain work done. Our purpose and mission is to be here alive in this world. So yes, the soul preceded the body, and yes, the soul will continue to exist afterwards. But that, we're saying, the journey in this world, 1 hour in this world, as the Mishnah says, Shah achat b'shuva u'masim tovim balamazeh. 1 moment in this world is far greater than the whole of the next world. To your boss, that 1 moment that you clinched a deal for him is more important, is worthwhile to give you that big holiday afterwards. 1 hour in the next world is more pleasurable than all of this. All right, your week in Las Vegas will be more pleasurable than the time you're spending in the office. But to the boss, that 1 hour in the office is more important where you're getting the work done. Okay, so that is the concept, the idea that we are discussing about how we get to achieve that. Now, of course, does this all jibe with what we discussed before about the supremacy of the spiritual worlds and the soul's resistance, the soul's hesitation to come down here in this world? And what we're saying is, of course, the soul's feelings on this matter are complex, which leads to those contradictory feelings. That's why it says, Al korchachata notzar, it's not by your will that you're born, that you were created, that you were formed, Al korchachata nolad, and it's not by your will that you're born, Al korchachata chai, and it's not by your will that you are alive, Al korchachata met, and it's not by your will that you die. Because, as much as that sounds like an oxymoron, if the fact that we live is against our soul's will, why would our death also be against our will? Which one is it? Do our souls want to inhabit bodies or not? You're telling me that the soul doesn't want to come into this world because it enjoys the heavenly realm. But then you're telling me that this world is far more important. Again, I think the key word is, the next world is more pleasurable, but this world is more important. The holiday, the vacation is more pleasurable, but the job to your boss is more important. So based on the way we explained it, we can understand that the divine soul has mixed feelings about its descent into a physical body. And maybe you have mixed feelings about going to work and getting out of bed and going to and facing the cold, but you understand what's the alternative. It's scary. You might face fellow coworkers who get on your nerves. You might face an angry boss. All those challenges, and the soul is saying, "I don't want to go into that world." Okay, but on the other hand, we know that it's exhilarating. It's exciting, and this is the moment of truth. The reason why it was created. It is the best, the most important thing that could happen to the soul. I know it sounds contradictory. Maybe, imagine a person is leaving a good job to start a new one. Does it ever happen? Yeah. Right? And the new one has potential to be even better and more lucrative than your previous job. But let me ask you, think back to that day. Is there not apprehension? Is there not butterflies? Are you not nervous? Are you not fearful? Does that not happen? Even though you know that you need to make that change so you could be in a better place. Imagine somebody, you ever went skydiving? Using this, I remember when I went skydiving. 20 years ago, my friends convinced me to go skydiving with them in Pretoria. I asked my mother's permission. She said no. No way. Don't you dare.
That's a good reaction.
Yeah. I did it. Now, I didn't train or prepare, but that's probably what the ideal should be. But the moment, I psyched myself up. I certainly got myself excited. But you want to know what happened when that plane to the door opened? I
didn't want to go.
I froze in my spot. I was so stiff. The guy said, "Jump." I was like, "No." He had to literally push me. Now you understand what it means? Al korchach at nolad. The soul doesn't want to go. The soul's apprehensive. Okay, but the soul has to come into this world. Let me read this to you. Reminded, there's a Hayom Yom, and it says as follows. It says, "The neshama vart oiben oiv dem zman." A soul waits above for this moment. Wenn sie wird solche sein, herabgehen in a guf. When it will have the opportunity to come down to this world into a physical, corporeal body. Weil the neshama filled, was sie can oiftan zayin digdalamata. Because the soul knows how much it can accomplish and achieve in this world. Okay? Yet, the soul is still apprehensive. And in another one, it says as follows. If you believe in divine providence, you understand this concept that everything that happens is mehashem mitzadei gaver kananu, means the footsteps of man are planted by God. That a soul coming into this world is here to refine and to achieve and to accomplish and to rectify its purpose, its mission in this world is to do umeot beshanim ogam mishaot briot haolam hine adavar shetzorch litbarar litaken. And this very purpose and function that you're coming into this world for may have been waiting who knows how long for you to be the one to achieve that tikkun, that refinement, that rectification. Waiting all this time for you to come into this world to achieve, to fulfill this divine mission. But there's a certain apprehension. When in heaven, the soul is reluctant to leave paradise. And that's why it says it's against your will that you live. It's not by your will that you are living, that you are born. When we're on earth, what happens? We don't want to die. I'm having a good time. That's why it's not by your will that either of these happen. Judaism teaches that God created the universe because he chose to find delight in directing a divine dichotomy. That is, us mortals surviving in a material habitat while striving to lead sacred and ethical lives. How? We have to implement the directives that the Torah teaches us. So, all of existence is here for what purpose? Why does it exist? To support life in this world. That's why man was created last. Everything preceded us. God gave us a ready-made, prepared world. We have all the tools necessary to achieve. And that's why Judaism considers life to be of supreme importance beyond all else. That said, my friends, the divine importance of this world, I know, seems to clash with the divine pleasures that are available to the soul in the afterlife. And that's why it creates that conflict within the soul. So let's recap everything we discussed today. And with that, you can enjoy some bliss of this world, some delicious lunch. Number one, death is not the end, is it? No. But nevertheless, my friends, we value life in this world more than in the world to come. So you remember this word here at the bottom of the screen? What does it say? Thanatophobia. Thanatophobia is the fear of death. This is the Jewish resolution to the fear of death. First of all, realize it's not the end. It's just the end to how we know things to what we're used to. But we value life more than anything else. As we discussed today, and will continue, please God, in the next year. I see that there are some questions here in the chat. Let me just quickly open it. I'll deal with them directly. All right.